Sunstruck is a composition that we commissioned from a living composer, Ben Hjertmann, who's here today. And it was funded through grant support from New Music USA. And part of that funding allows for Ben to be here and talk about his piece. So we're going to invite him up.
Thank you all, and thanks for coming. I'm very honored to be here and be working with New Thread Quartet on this project, and this is the first time this piece will ever be played live. So it's very exciting for a composer. Imagine us kind of locked in a closet with dots on paper and ideas and wanting to really hear what that's eventually going to sound like, and this is kind of the most exciting day for us to get to finally hear it. We had the idea that it might be interesting to introduce this piece to you a little bit by explaining some of the more extreme things that happen in the piece. In addition to the normal playing styles on their instruments, I've also specified that the performers use vibrato. So if you don't know what vibrato is, you know, when you see string players, they put their finger down on a note, and then you often see them moving their hand a little bit to warm up the sound. It sends the sound waves out in kind of a warmer way. It's something that wind performers will do already, sort of naturally, but I've chosen to be really specific about how much vibrato they use at different parts in the piece. So Zach is going to help me demonstrate, and hopefully as you're hearing the piece, you can kind of listen for these different levels. So maybe the first level would be if you can just play a note with no vibrato at all. So we'll hear a lot of long chords in this piece, and we have a beautiful space to hear these come back to us. So you can imagine if all of the players are doing that, then we just hear kind of a static sound. And then sort of the next level would be to add in a little bit of very slow vibrato. We'll hear kind of very slow waves in the sound, just very subtle. Almost like the sound is circling around a little bit. And so that's done with variations in the pressure of the breath that they're putting into the instrument. So maybe we'll demonstrate then a little bit of a faster version of that vibrato, sort of warming up the sound, what we call warm vibrato in this piece. So you hear kind of a shimmering there. And then I've taken it to further extremes, asking them to use their jaw and change their jaw pressure as well to create more of an extreme vibrato. And this will be the last one we'll demonstrate here, just the most extreme jaw vibrato, which will make sort of a wild kind of sirening sound. So that's one of the things you're going to be hearing, and we thought it might be also interesting to demonstrate microtones. So if you went to the piano and you played 4 notes right next to each other, then you'd hear a very, what we could say, dissonant sound, a sound with a lot of clash to it. So I'm going to ask the group first to play 4 half steps in a row, 4 notes consecutive on the piano. So that's kind of can be notated with traditional notation, and I've extended that a little bit further to add in what we might say the notes in the cracks of the piano, in between these notes. So now we'll hear 4 notes right next to each other, but crunched to even half of the overall pitch space. What was especially intriguing to me about this kind of sound was that, if you're around afterward, maybe you can give me your reactions to what you think about this, but it seems to me that it could be, as the notes get closer and closer together, it could be heard as being more crunchy, more dissonant, more ugly sounding. Or, as they get closer, maybe they start to come closer and closer to just the shimmering sound that you heard with the vibrato. Just sort of a kind of complex vibration of the chord. So those are 2 things that you'll hear in this piece that are a little bit more extreme than the normal notation for music. And the last thing I wanted to mention was in this piece you'll hear a lot of silences, and some of them are a few measures long, and we're lucky to be in this beautiful space where we can hear this sound continue. And so in their music, it says over the rests, as they stop playing their instruments, it says, keep listening. And the idea is that after they've stopped putting sound into the instruments, we'll continue to listen to the sound in the space. And I challenge you to do that as well as you're hearing the piece. It's very quiet mostly. And you'll try as we listen to, they're going to play just one chord, and then they're going to stop playing, and we'll see how long we can follow the sound through the room here. So you'll hear, depending on what range they're playing in on their instruments and depending on how loud they're playing, different amounts of length in terms of how long we hear that sound come back to us. So those might be some things to listen to as you're listening to this piece. I hope that you can relax into it as it said, it's over 20 minutes long, and you can listen to these silences and long chords in that way.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about how you related this piece to the tarot card, the sun.
Yeah, this is the image of the sun as being kind of a joyful freedom, that as you walk out into the sun, feeling this sort of energy of complete freedom, kind of boyish freedom in my case, that remembering kind of how anything seems possible with this kind of life-giving light that we get from the sun, and how everything's powered by it. And the way that I wrote this piece was I challenged myself to be especially free with the music, so that I sat down at the piano and continued to write new music without forcing it to be into a form or some kind of pre-prescribed idea of what it should sound like. So a lot of what you'll hear has that kind of free construction, that you'll just hear something that feels logical immediately, maybe after what you just heard, but hopefully it can kind of feel like it could take you anywhere next.
Yeah, there's a bit of spontaneity. Times where the texture just sort of whirls and changes into something else, and it really develops in that way. I thought maybe we'd open up to any questions. I don't know if any of you have ever met a living composer, or if you have any questions about how he writes the music that he does. So just to summarize, the piece is 25 or 30 minutes long, big sections, and some of them are very large sections of silence. He freely composed the piece through and sort of wrote us about this little inspiration from a tarot card called the Sun. So do any of you have questions about how Ben writes his music or what he did with this piece? Don't be shy.
Yeah. Would you do a lot more of the stream of conscious writing without prescribing a form on it? Would you find yourself going back and editing things, though, to coincide with what's happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was whether, since I composed it sort of freely in time, did I go back and edit it? And yes, I did, but as I was working with the group and talking to them about this, I decided to keep kind of the initial, we might say form, the initial order of everything, so that it would stay with that free compositional style, kind of, as you say, stream of consciousness. But I did go back and change a few notes here and there, or maybe make something a little bit longer, and wanted to kind of make sure all the T's were crossed and I's were dotted. But yeah, that was kind of that was a tricky question because it's sort of a slippery slope of how free is free, and especially with these notes and the cracks between the notes on the piano, there's this question throughout the piece of how we hear that, and does it sound, can it sound consonant? Can it sound reverberant and joyful and free, or does it sound dark? It depends on, I think it depends a lot on the listener. So I'm definitely curious afterward in the reception if anyone wants to react to that or give me thoughts. Yeah.
You mentioned about how the moments of silence and how in a room like this, the sound will kind of continue. Was that your intention when you wrote it to be formative of any of this, or is that kind of the excitement about changing it?
It's definitely preferred for this piece. Another thing that we were talking about is how often in this piece I'll have maybe 5 notes, and we only have 4 players. They can only play 1 note at a time, but what you'll hear is sort of the first 4 notes, and then someone will leave a note and go to a different one, and we'll leave one without a performer on it for a minute, but you'll continue to hear that pitch in the room, so it really helps to have a reverberant space like this. I can't say it's ultimately required, but it's definitely preferred. Yeah, it's a question too.
Yeah, it was a very meditative kind of style of the piece, listening to what just happened or what might come next. Sections with big gaps of silence where we're just supposed to, rest and feel what was there, listen to what's happening. You sort of had this memory of what the sound was, and then, is it the same thing that's coming next? Does it change?
Hey Ben.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity to do a live stream talk with Ben a week ago, and he said something that really stuck with me about intuition and what a former composition teacher told you about intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, I mentioned that I had a teacher of composition who had the opinion that intuition, by that we mean what do you do when you just sit down at the piano and come up with new material without planning it out ahead of time? And his idea was that intuition is not really anything more than just everything you've learned throughout your whole life, all your education and all of your experience being put to use in real time. So his point is that it's not that you can ever get rid of the planning and the rules you've learned and how you understand harmony and all of that. That all of that would still be there, in the moment. Which I think is an interesting idea. That his point is sort of intuition is not really intuition; it's more just synthesis of all of these other things that you have in your tool belt as a composer.
Any other questions?
Anything else?
I think we should play it.
All right.
All right, well, we owe a lot to Ben for working with us on this piece. It's been pretty much an epic project for us for this portion of the year. And a big thanks to New Music USA, which is an organization that provided some funding for Ben to be here and his work. So without further ado, this is Sunstruck.